All right, so what are we going to go through today? Really, we're going to, introduce ourselves and go through a ransomware scenario. It'll be kind of a simple one, but it's just to illustrate really kind of what you normally will see when you see ransomware, and then walk you through the incident response process. Really, how do we respond? How do we deal with this threat? And then we're going to give you a Q&A time. So please feel free to use the chat, use the Q&A, ask whatever you need or curious about or want. There's no stupid questions here. So just feel free to ask whatever. We have a wealth of experience to share with you, but I'm sure that there are probably other security experts on the call which are very experienced as well and might be able to learn something in chat as well. So feel free to interact and network and use this as an opportunity to ask questions to make this as interactive as possible. And then we're going to go through some next steps. Next slide. All right, so I'm Art O'Kane, field CISO and CIO, also handling virtual CISO and CIO for Airiam. This is Dwayne Robinson. Dwayne, what are you doing at Eviden?
Thanks, Art. Yeah, and thanks for inviting me to join. So Dwayne Robinson, I guess the official title, as it says, there's Senior Director of Cyber Investigations for our Americas jurisdiction. Which basically just means I handle everything sort of DFIR related, whether it's incident response, forensics, BECs, e-discovery, recovery services, et cetera. Sort of rolls up to me within North and South America. But
wow, that's a lot. Wow, we have the head honcho on the call. Next slide.
Yeah,
tell us about Eviden.
Yeah, and we're actually kind of going through a bit of identity crisis, I tell some people. So Atos, which is publicly traded on the French market, headquartered in Paris. The company is, I joke around, it's the biggest startup you never heard of before. There's about 110,000 people in 73 countries. We're right in the process of splitting out. We're in the process of sort of splitting out, in about a 55-45 split. And then if you follow the news, we're just selling off what we call our tech foundation side, which is kind of the traditional IT support. All the other bits and pieces are getting rebranded as Eviden. Atos grew via acquisitions over the years. And, I basically am, my paycheck comes from one of those acquisitions. There's about 30 of us that never officially got folded under the Atos brand, but with the move to Eviden, that's all sort of happening. So, if you were to send an email to me, I got about half a dozen I may respond out of, but the push is to all Eviden. But but we do have about we do a bunch of different things: cloud, digital, green, energy, like all sorts of interesting, cool stuff. I'm in the cybersecurity side, of course, and we have about 7,000 of those. And specifically on the DFIR, we're about just shy of 500 globally, specifically in DFIR sort of thing. So that's kind of
very large team.
Yep.
Very large team. Wow. Next slide.
Yeah, well, this is probably right off our website, but we're a big consulting company, right? We there's others. We prefer you to come with us, and I will say I just came over in March of this year. I've been super impressed. There's a lot of smart cookies within the organization, and on any given day, I'll chat with some of them. Like, man, I like, how long do we retirement? I can't keep up with some of these guys, but anyways, so there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do. If you want to reach out, we can have a more in-depth conversation.
Awesome. And Airiam, so we were really a M&A combination of 5 different MSPs and MSSPs. We offer a pretty wide range of products and services that are really focused at resilience. really our whole concept is cyber resilience and keeping companies productive while giving them the ability to bounce back from an attack. We have three kind of interconnected missions here, which offer the best IT management products and services, the best-in-class cybersecurity platform, and create more value for businesses through resilience. And we're seeing resilience as really our purpose in life right now. So we're really focusing down on that. Everything that is kind of DFIR, that kind of stuff, we're partnering with companies like Eviden to provide those services. We're focusing on getting you back up and running after an attack. We've been in the press a lot. We have offices in Houston, Rockville, Salisbury, Maryland, Milwaukee, and Central Pennsylvania, and I'm in the Central Pennsylvania office. All right, so everybody's seen a ton of stats, and these kind of are these are stats from really kind of last year's set of stats. Now there have been a lot of new reports that have shown some more stats from 2022 and starting in 2023 so far. So what we're seeing is 2022 we had kind of a drop in ransomware, but there were increases in other kinds of cyber attacks, and then 2023 everybody's on fire again. So it's increased volume overall, and a lot of this is small businesses. So a lot of the big problem is a lot of small businesses and small and medium-sized enterprise thinks that they're kind of immune or that they don't have to worry about it because all the attacks are focused at the big companies that you hear about on the front page news. While those ones are getting the press because they're publicly traded companies and are big and famous, there are a lot of small businesses that are getting attacked all the time. And their ability to bounce back is really inhibited compared to a large organization that has a bigger budget, more technology, et cetera. So what we want to do is be able to enable companies of all sizes to be able to bounce back from an attack. Next slide. All right, so let me run through a real fast scenario for you, and then we'll kind of use that as our basis point for the rest of these. Next slide. And think of this as a really tiny kind of tabletop here. First, what can you expect? Okay, cyber criminals are like traditional criminals. They're motivated by money. Now there's ransomware as a service, so it's even easier for people to get started. All you have to do is want to make money and have a kind of criminal inclination, and you can become a hacker now. They play games, with wording, et cetera, to try to leverage on different people in your company to try to get paid. And so it may not just be a conversation with your CEO. It may be a conversation that they're having with your clients, threatening to exfiltrate data. So they're doing a lot of things and using a lot of tools in order to get paid. That's their ultimate goal, is to get you to pay the ransom. Next slide. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Jump in with some color if I can. All right, and it sort of ties into the slide before as well. That unfortunately, the smaller entities. So, often the clients they're kind of victims of circumstance and stuff as well, right? Like the bad guys will take advantage of an open vulnerability, or phishing emails, another one, or like even just like brute force RDP, right? And the smaller companies for sure, they're more likely to have sort of a third party IT support guy that kind of comes in via remote desktop, and that's how he does that's how he fixes up Mary's computer and stuff, right? So, or he comes by once a month and does patching for him, the best case scenario. But any of the 0-day type stuff they're going to miss. So that's, just to stress the small businesses especially just don't have that maturity and resilience that typically the bigger companies have. And it's unfortunate situation it is, right? But yeah, you're right. Like the bad guys don't care. Like,
No,
I've seen a small 2-3 person doctor's office right up to, multinational companies and stuff. Everybody is vulnerable to it. And
absolutely.
yeah, and I just wanted to kind of drive that home to people.
Absolutely. That's a hard conversation I've had with a lot of people, even local eye doctors and stuff like that. Is that real? Is that something that can happen to me? Yes. Yes. It could be tomorrow. So here's a scenario. Just imagine it's Tuesday, you come in to the office and you're about to run payroll. You open Sage 50 or whatever application you have, QuickBooks, etc., and go to run payroll, and the application freezes up. It won't open the company file. And you're like, okay, what's going on? I can see the server. You open up the server directory and you see that everything has the same kind of extension on it. And here I put .fried in the example, but it could really be anything. That's really kind of, indicating that something's going on. And with each variant, you're kind of seeing different signs on the files, and then they're being handled a little bit differently. But when files are being renamed, that's really a telltale sign that you have something going on. All right, next slide. All right, now if you see a ransom note, a lot of times it looks just like this, or some variation of this, but usually it'll kind of threaten you with a timeline. This says 7 days. And they're giving you a link to pay them.
One thing that ransom note, when you, like I say, you come in, that's exact scenario. That's going to be sort of the last step in the ransomware process, right? Most likely, they've probably been in your environment for weeks to months, right? And you got to go back, 6 months, that initial phishing email that hopefully we don't have anybody named Bob, that Bob got, right? That was the initial point of entry. It pulled down a piece of malware. They sort of laterally spread throughout the environment. They surgically, went through everybody's, documents looking for stop till exfiltrate. They gathered all that data, exfiltrated it off, probably left a sort of backdoor, and then the last thing they do is execute that, decryption thing. You get the note, and they wait for your call, chat. But yeah,
absolutely. There's a lot that a threat actor does before they actually drop the ransomware payload. Doing reconnaissance around your network, figuring out what the most important data is, exfiltrating it, and neutralizing your backups is very common also, because threat actors know that if you can recover, you're not going to pay them.
Yep.
So they, often, almost every time will attack your backups. And so if you have on-premise backups, they will encrypt your backups or delete your backups. If you have a SAN, and a lot of people are like, well, I'll just roll back to my SAN snapshot. I'm ransomware proof, right? Well, a lot of times they will get into your SAN and delete your SAN snapshot, so you have no way to recover. So they do all this leading up to dropping ransomware on your network, because they know as soon as they execute and do that and put ransom notes on everybody's computer, as soon as they run that, it's loud and clear what happened. So they're trying to do everything they can to make sure they get paid, get your data, etc. before then. Make sure they have good backdoors. So it could have been weeks, it could have been months that they've been in there digging around. And initial access, what are you seeing there, Dwayne, as far as initial access could have been a long time before the ransomware gets dropped.
I think I'm trying to think, the farthest back that we saw as part of our forensic, investigations was 8 months of ones that come to mind. There might have been a longer one, but it can typically been way back, and sometimes they'll make the initial entrance, and we've seen them they'll do it, and then they sit it, and then it's quiet for 3 months even, right? And you know, we found that one bad guy sells that access off to another bad guy, right? And that's the guy that actually will, you know, will start trashing the backups and, you know, deleting snapshots, like I say, and all. Like it is, they do a pretty good job of running amok throughout your environment, so that you do not have a choice but to call them for the decryptor. Which I should forewarn, that's not even a foolproof method. Like, you know, that's 50 to 75% sort of, you know, success rate in many scenarios, right? So it's yeah.
Yep, I've had servers where even though the client has paid millions of dollars in order for us to be able to decrypt this, you know, key servers have not been recoverable after decryption. So databases have been corrupted in the encryption process. So even though it's effectively decrypted, the database is unusable, you know, and that may be their core financial system. It may be their core sales system and their core ERP system that runs their whole organization. The one key system that is the most important thing, that's why they paid the ransom, is now unrecoverable. Yeah.
And you're not getting warranty support from these guys.
Exactly. Exactly. Almost always, if you call a vendor, and I mean, I can speak to Microsoft and VMware both. I've called, and as soon as they hear the ransomware word, they refuse to support you. So it's yeah, your support contracts and warranties are kind of pointless then. Anyway, what do? Do you turn everything off? You know, that's a common response. Hey, let's run around. We're getting hacked. Turn off all our computers and servers. Do you call 911? Is immediate thing. Call the state police or call the FBI, or you know, how do you respond? You see this ransom note and you need to be back up and running. You know that you may lose, you know, $1 million if you don't get this project out, or if you don't get the shipment out. So you need to get back up and running. Do you just get your wallet and go pay the ransom? Or, you know, are you worried about your client data and your reputation, and say, okay, we need to put out a PSA. We need to call the newspaper, call the news, let them know we've been breached, be transparent with our clients and let them know, hey, this is what happened. We're doing our best to remediate. You know, how are you going to communicate that? What do you do? Yeah, and what are your thoughts looking at these, Dwayne?
Yeah, you know, this is all tongue in cheek for those that, you know, haven't picked up on that, but yeah, don't turn all your computers and servers. Unplug, disconnect, absolutely, but at least, well, I'm going to put on a forensic hat in this perspective, but a lot of the forensic evidence and artifacts and stuff actually reside in memory these days, so you will lose all of that if you shut it all down, right? So, and just one thing about the paying the ransom, you may it may, we'll get to that. I don't want to jump to the next slide per se, but you may need to pay the ransom. Like each scenario is kind of different, or you may want to pay the ransom for a variety of reasons. I've seen numerous companies as well, you know, go to the bank because they don't necessarily have $1 million in their pocket, go to the bank to, you know, to borrow the money to pay the ransom. But if you actually say that to the bank, there's a good chance you may not get the money, which is going to turn around and handcuff you a little bit more as well. So it's a delicate situation, you know, when this happens, right? But yeah, don't call 911.
Yeah, definitely have an incident response plan in place, regardless of the size of your organization, and think about these things ahead of time. From a forensic point of view, like you said, don't turn off your computers and servers because they actually have forensic evidence. And if you're seeing ransom notes on all your computers, it's too late. Turning it off won't save you anything. Your machine's already encrypted. So you know, if anything, one of the things I do is unplug the WAN from the firewall, so that you know, so I'm disconnecting communication for the threat actor. But other than that, you know, you should leave your environment up and running.
Yeah. Like I said, it potentially, you could damage it even more as well. Like if it's, say, 3/4 of the way through the encryption process, like it doesn't happen instantly, right? It takes a little bit of time, you know. But if you turn it off midway of that may be unrecoverable, even if you do have to go down and get a decryptor and stuff. Right? So
yeah. exactly. Next slide. All right. So yeah, regardless of your path out of this, it's never really cheap. There's not a once you are in the position where you've been hit by this, usually you have to deal with, some cyber liability, some contractual obligations, some regulations, things like that. And you're needing to pull in a lawyer. You're pulling in your cyber insurance. You're pulling in a forensics team. You're pulling in, ransom negotiators, things like that. A PR firm to write a story. There's a lot of things going on. As it's hard to DIY your way out of ransomware scenario and do it well.
Yeah. Especially like if you're in any sort of regulated industry at all, like healthcare is a big one. It's all in the news because it's a big target. There's a lot of sensitive information that is worth high value, right? So, but it could be a variety of things. Maybe maybe you're a collections company, right? Or maybe just publicly traded, variety of things, depending on where you're physically located, depending on the line of business that you're in. There may be regulatory authorities. That's where the breach counsel is kind of specialized in that area. Just what you have to adhere to, right? You may need to go public with that in a certain period of time. Maybe you don't. Sometimes it does depend on what the forensic company that's involved. What has it been validated that exfiltration, which is them stealing your data, actually took place or not, right? And if they did, did they take sensitive data or did they just take garbage data? And I guess I would just add to that, just because we've seen some crazy things happen in the negotiation side. We call it proof of life, where the threat actor basically says they took data. They go to, we ask for proof of life. They go to showcase that, and maybe it's not yours. It's some other company, or Anyways, it's all sorts of different things that have taken place. So, but
absolutely, yeah. And notice we're focusing on ransomware here because that's really the scenario we set up. But there are a lot of different cyber attacks that will include pieces of this. Ransomware is very common right now and very loud. So it's going to include all of this in your response. But if you have another kind of breach that's not destructive like ransomware, you still will have obligation to a breach notification of pulling in, PR, pulling in a cyber lawyer to deal with everything, that kind of thing. If you have a business email compromise, you're still going to probably have a forensic team investigating what was, compromised, what the extent of it was. Are you the only account? Doing kind of an e-discovery, things like that. So there's other cyber attacks may have little pieces of this. So it's important in your incident response plan to really kind of take into consideration that all of this is really possible for you.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And in the not cheap sort of categories, well, they're like most policies that I've seen are what they call a reimbursement policy. So not only are you on the hook or potentially on the hook for $1 million ransom payment, you're also cut off from any revenue coming in the door. Potentially the bank could cut you off as well. And, you would have to pay our bills and then potentially get reimbursed from the insurance carrier kind of after the fact. So, it's not cheap.
No. Fortunately. All right, next slide. All right, so the right way is not easy. And this first one, don't talk about your breach to anyone. Super important. And on all the cases I've been on, sometimes employees will go and run and put on Twitter and Facebook or something about it. You want to make sure that there's a communication plan in place and that everybody knows not to discuss this. It's going to be kind of, something that can, incorrect communications can really accelerate the problem. and for you, and you want to, everything needs to be methodical. So I always suggest that pulling in that cyber lawyer, that breach counsel, to help you know work through how you are responding and conducting those communications and handling everything. That is going to be your key buddy during this. And next, really, everybody wants to call law enforcement, and I've seen a lot of value in the FBI lately. The FBI has really been an ally on U.S. incidents, as far as helping out, and especially if you're going to end up paying the ransom, they can help in a lot of ways there. Not helping you pay the ransom, but investigatively figuring out where it's going, things like that. But make sure you're conducting all of this through your lawyer. Work with your cyber law firm, and figure out really what the best way during your incident to respond is.
Yeah. And no offense, if there's any general counsel or whatever on the call, I'm not sure, but most companies, just general counsel, law company they deal with, they're not really equipped, for the most part. I don't want to generalize, but they're not used to these cyber incidents like a dedicated sort of breach lawyer, if you will, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. You made a comment about the FBI, which is actually was interesting. There's tool. I'm kind of getting off script here. I apologize. Sorry, but
no, go for it.
There's tools out there that can help you track your Bitcoin payment to see where it's going to, for example, right? But the threat actors nowadays are moving to kind of what they deem non-traceable cryptocurrency, like XMR, right? And most of those general tools don't have that big, but I have a good authority, I suppose. Like the FBI, they are a step above most sort of forensic companies and whatnot, and they have access to extremely expensive tools that the rest of us just don't get, where they can sort of track that stuff. So, but absolutely, I agree. Like talk to your breach lawyer first and foremost, and before you go and call anyone.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. All right, let's jump through the process here. There's the NIST 861 incident response cycle. And then really built off of that was the SANS incident response process. And so these are very similar. The idea, the cycle obviously is you're constantly kind of having to go through this. And most of you who are in a corporation with any size, you're probably dealing with constant incidents. They may be small, they may be attempts, et cetera, but there's always some kind of cycle going on. SANS lays theirs out more of a process, but I love the granularity of SANS, going from preparation for the incident, and through identifying the incident, containing the incident, eradicating the threat, and recovering and lessons learned. I would add, that post-incident activity up top there at the 861. That's missing from the SANS process here, but that is super important if you want to stop this from just happening again and again and again. Recovery will usually get you to the point where you were running before, and we need to make sure that you're constantly improving your environment. Dwayne, as far as Eviden, when you're managing an incident, do you deal with a lot of clients before the incident to kind of help them prepare? Or is it usually you're getting the call when they're on fire and you're having to identify what's going on?
Yeah, not enough times does the client call us before. Like I could probably count on one hand how many times a client has called us up, say, you know what, like the backup's been failing, not sure why. A couple of these domain controllers aren't authenticating properly, but we can't figure out why. It's like something just doesn't smell right. Can you help us out? And usually, yes, we'll jump in. We try to put some things in place to mitigate the breach, but the bad guy's already been in for 6 months, right? He's already starting to run amok. We can save some of it, but most of the time it's mop up duty, to be brutally honest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we get called in for recovery to rebuild a network, it's usually complete devastation when we're getting called in.
Yeah.
Usually the internal IT team or the company has been trying to get back up without us, for days. And then they got to the point where they're calling insurance, and they're calling for help, and they're searching the web for somebody to help them. And by then there's usually not a whole lot left to recover from. So a lot of times we're rebuilding or decrypting. Sometimes we get lucky and find something, but yeah.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
next slide.
Sorry,
Mhm.
I was gonna,
Go ahead.
there's a bunch of companies that do they've got proactive measures and stuff in place, and that's great. And a bunch of companies that have cyber insurance and stuff, that's great. And probably a subset of those that have an incident response plan, which is great. And even a much smaller subset of those that actually test their incident response plan and do some like tabletop exercise type stuff and figure out where their blind spots are once they kind of get to it, right? And I would stress more organizations do that, because finding out in the thick of it that you don't have the ability to go get that $1 million from the bank, like you want to find that out before you actually need it. So
Yeah. Exactly. And that may be building your whole business continuity plan around some more cash liquidity, because if it's not ransomware and it's other kind of incident, you may need cash to float your company during some other kind of incident as well. So this is definitely a part of it. All right, preparation. A preparation phase for me is usually an inventory. And when I'm just talking about an inventory, I'm talking about really not only just a list of what your assets and users are, but understanding really passwords, applications, things that are critical to the company. For us, it's important to know in that inventory of all your stuff, what's actually important. When an incident happens, what are your crown jewels there? What support and what do you need that's in that inventory list that supports that crown jewel? Your ERP system may not work without your domain controller. So understanding really the whole system is important. And in that preparation phase, obviously the incident response plan and kind of a DR plan around backup and restore is super important. But lately, insurance has been driving a lot of it, and that has been improving your defenses, getting MFA, EDR, good backups, things like that in place. From a response point of view, Dwayne, have you seen that really kind of the push from cyber insurance lately has actually improved your response ability, or are most of the calls that you're getting still the people that really haven't upgraded to what cyber nowadays is asking for?
No, I would say I'll quote something that a guy from an insurance care did on a previous webinar last year before, anyways. But for the last couple of years, is what I was quoted in, was for every dollar that was brought in by a new policy or renewal policy, 3 went out the door in 2021, for example. Right. So out of sheer necessity that the insurance markets are bleeding money, they have really come a long way to enforce companies have a much better posture before they're even going to be allowed to, get a policy or renew their policy and stuff, right? So just because you even had a policy before, don't just, blindly think that you're going to get it automatically renewed if you've done nothing, right? And if you've had an incident, in the past, that's probably even more so. You're going to have to unfortunately put some money down to bolster your defenses, if you will. But no, they're taking a much bigger stance on the proactive side. Now, for sure, we still get a lot of clients that have had nothing. Maybe they got a cyber add on to their business insurance, and maybe it's $50,000 or something. That's probably not going to go very far, to be brutally honest. Anyways, no, for sure, they're much bigger stance. just to answer your
Yeah,
question.
and I think that right now, because regulation kind of lags. It takes years to get anything into motion regulation wise. As far as recoverability, it is insurance driving the market. It's by putting these controls in place to try to stop their own cash bleed. Insurance is increasing the security of your organization. So I do recommend that if you don't have cyber insurance, you get cyber insurance. And when you get that form, that's the onboarding form, just don't just check yes on everything. Look at the questions and actually like, do you know what endpoint detection and response is? If you don't, ask someone who does. It may not be a technology that you have. It may be something that you need to invest in, and it's definitely worth investing in. So it's not cheap to get cyber insurance these days because of all this other tech you have to have. But all this stuff is very important to protect you these days.
Yeah. I touched on one thing too you mentioned earlier, just about, the crown jewels and knowing what data you have and stuff. And we've seen this, we've seen this all too many times as well. And especially in those companies that have grown via acquisition stuff is right. So they just bought an organization maybe, and they don't, it's not fully adopted or whatever, and they haven't fully assimilated their stuff in, but we've when we ask them, so where are your crown jewels? What data could they have? Sometimes we've gotten like a list of like hundreds of servers. It could be anywhere on here. Well, guess that's expensive for us to kind of go through all of those lists of servers, even just doing a lightweight triage to try to find, to validate what the threat actor maybe show for, 2 files as proof of life that it's your data. And if you don't, most people aren't going to recognize those 2 files, so we got to validate those 2 files. And it's so having a good, good handle on what you actually own is very important. Just I want to drive that home as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next slide. And in identification, now that Sage is encrypted here and you're trying to get your payroll out, how are you identifying that you've been breached? With ransomware, it's usually those ransom notes and encrypted files is kind of what the end user is going to see. If you have a sysadmin who has their eyes open, or if you have some monitoring software, EDR, you're probably seeing other stuff. You're seeing, privilege escalation. You're seeing lateral movement through the network as they're moving from machine to machine, and you're seeing surveillance activity and exfiltration of data and staging data, things like that. But usually by the time you realize you had ransomware, it's what you're seeing is encrypted files and ransom notes. Dwayne, as far as BEC, I know you guys deal with BEC. How does a user usually know that their box has been compromised?
Yeah, and often they don't know, but yeah, the BCs for sure, like you mentioned earlier, like well, I think in 2022 was actually from a total quantity, not obviously dollar value, but just number of incidents actually surpassed ransomware for 2022, I believe is that's what I heard anyway. So so it's a big problem. It's not as costly of a problem typically, but extremely common. I was on with a client yesterday, right? There was an email exchange back and forth. Halfway through that email exchange, and thankfully one of the persons spotted out like that seems like a weird email domain. It was had the company's name in it, but they put some color and stuff around it, and by the untrained eye, it looked like it could be legit, right? And somebody, they did the classic case of like, oh, okay, well, we, because there was a delay in the transfer file, I need to give you a different bank ID to transfer the funds to. They had a good story behind it, and thankfully they didn't actually. Somebody was smart; they're paying attention, and no money transfer was made. But that stuff is extremely common these days. Extremely common, right? Yeah.
Yeah, our phone rings off the hook from people that are, executive impersonation, from invoice fraud, from account takeover where someone got phished, and then, the threat actor is emailing out information out of their box, or sets up a rule to forward a copy to them, that kind of thing of anything they've received. Yeah, it's super common now. So, and it's one of those things that you don't know unless someone brings something to your attention saying, hey, I received this invoice from you. And you're like, well, I didn't send that. And then you look at the trail and the headers and you're like, it's like, yes, you did. And then you realize that, oh, my email has been compromised.
Yeah. And it's, we've seen, and often I would say like a business email, like it's not totally uncommon for a business email compromise, or a phished email. Like it's a fine line. Like we've
Mhm.
seen them transform basically into a full blown ransomware attack, right?
Mhm.
So, don't just like this, fluff it off, if you will, right? Because there may be a link in that somebody clicked on. Um, yeah. Anyway, it's extremely common, but
Yeah, and if they're able to get into your email and own your account, usually they can get into the rest of your network. Usually you have the same creds, and they're able to leverage that to get around the rest of the controls.
yeah, I read an interesting sort of quote there yesterday, I think it was even, but the threat actors don't necessarily need to get into every account or all the
Mhm.
strong accounts. They just need to get by the weak ones, right? So,
Yep.
yeah, just
Yeah,
don't be the weakest.
exactly. Next slide. Yeah, regarding the weakest link, a lot of times it is our executives because we don't know. A lot of times they're resistant to MFA. They're highly targeted, things like that. But I've seen incidents happen because of the receptionist. So, once the threat actor can get into the environment, even through the receptionist's account, they can usually find some other vulnerability and get around your network. So it may not need to be your admin, your network administrator that they attack. I mean, that makes it easy for them if they do have that level of privilege, but a determined threat actor is impossible to stop. Really, like they're going to find a way these days. So that's why this incident response is so important, because it's time to just be honest with ourselves and understand that we're going to get hacked. We just need a way to recover quickly. And if you're going to be truly resilient, you're going to be able to bounce back and yes, acknowledge that you had an incident and deal with all the steps, but ideally your business is able to keep operating.
Yeah.
So under containment, and this is something we're involved in a lot as the beginning of kind of our recovery, is creating an air gap, isolating affected systems. And so we do it in a way that forensics is still able to do their investigation. And we're creating a containment network for recovery. So we're starting to restore machines into a recovered network. But yeah, initially you may want to unplug the internet from your firewall, just to kick the attacker out, because they're usually still connected to your network. And if there's other kinds of malware that acts as a worm and allows them to get from machine to machine, sometimes it's a method is to air gap each machine. And so we've done that before by turning off a core switch or unplugging all the patch cables from a core switch. But you don't want to shut down machines, and even your firewall, because it has logs as well. Because when you shut down a machine, you're losing all of the stuff that is in memory that is like rich information for forensics to be able to use, that history of this executable running.
Yep. Yeah, which you may need as part of your notification, for example, and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just one other thing in kind of in between identification and containment stuff. Like, not all endpoint software is considered the same, and sometimes it depends on how you configured it as well. Right? Like we've seen a lot of big organizations with a suite of great tools that throws an alert at 2 o'clock in the morning that maybe the policy wasn't strict enough because security and functionality are opposing forces sometimes, right? So it's gone by, and guess what? That was the privilege escalation process or the encryption process for everything, right? So yeah. Anyway, if you can, minimizing that impact with a nice segregated network will definitely help as well. I very few organizations I've seen, go to the extent of where they probably shouldn't, to be honest. But
yeah, absolutely. And we've done a lot of segmentation projects as far as the post-incident improvement for companies, because organizations, regardless of size, even very large enterprises, tend to be very flat. They may have a lot of different networks, but it's wide open. They can talk to everybody, so the threat actor can get around. And the ideal situation is this containment phase. You're kind of architecting for this ahead of time. On your network layer at your organization, you're kind of setting up so finance and HR and sales and engineering and all these are segmented networks, and they're not really able to affect each other. In the ideal situation, HR gets ransomware and blows up HR and nukes the HR server, but not the whole rest of the organization. And so that's really the ideal, because that's much easier to recover from than your entire organization being flattened.
Yep.
So that is something we can architect for, and something that is something that unfortunately we don't get to work on until after the incident usually.
Yeah. And it's a statement I hear a few times. Well, the sysadmins don't have access to the HR tools or vice versa. Doesn't matter, right? There's software that the bad guys get, readily available for like pennies or dollars that can give them the access, right? They just give themselves it. Basically, we call it privilege escalation, but it's very easy for these guys to do if it's freely available kind of at the network layer and stuff. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is something that segmentation, permission segmentation is important, but network layer segmentation or physical segmentation, actually, kind of enforces that a lot. And leveling that up, the next kind of improvement from that is that zero trust concept that you're hearing a lot these days, is really making that, segmentation as well as permissions, and having that all tied to identity and really what you're trying to access. Bob's able to access the sales folder, but Steve's not. But then making it so the network really is in alignment for that. Next slide. So eradication, Dwayne, can you speak to what you guys are usually doing for kicking out the threat?
Yeah. I guess it kind of depends on how deep their
We go next slide again, just eradication here.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. I was saying it sort of depends on how deep their meaty little hooks and stuff were in there. And often assume, unless you know for sure that something is clean and healthy, assume it's not, right? Assume it's infected, even if maybe it's not, it hasn't been, in the ransomware scenario, it hasn't been encrypted, potentially, as they, they'll hit the big go button and it goes through all the machines. Maybe you caught it in time, you've unplugged everything before it got to that, but it could just be sitting there waiting, lingering, right? So assume it's dirty, right? And we definitely, and part of this sort of ties into the recovery side as well. I don't want to steal your kind of thunder there, but you'll hear a phase. Well, some people put some different colors on it. We call it like red, yellow, green type thing, right? As you're moving, you got your infected environment. You need to get to a nice, clean, healthy state. There's a process that you want to get. Like, you don't want to just, even if you go and pay get the decryptor, and I'm kind of jumping all over your timeline here, sorry, but get the decryptor, you pull it, don't just decrypt kind of in the production environment on the box and stuff it is, right? So you want to move it through in a systematic way. But again, you need resources, you need space and stuff, right? That's easier said than done, which is, anyway, which kind of gets into the like test the plan type out, back in the early days. But Yeah, there's some like some super common tools that we see lots. Like Mimikatz, for example. We'll see like Cobalt Strike is it's a very common tool that pen testers, red team type people and stuff use. It's also a very common tool that the threat actors and stuff use, right? So, unfortunately, in some cases, if you just finish going through a pen test red team type exercise, you want to do that exercise. So maybe the firewall admins have sort of opened that up to make it easier, from the outside, right? Hopefully you plugged all that back up afterwards and stuff. But anyways, there's a lot of software, especially in the ransomware as a service type scenario that these guys use that at least it's common. Good tools will know it, see it, and they can block it out if your policies are, up to snuff, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Next slide. And I know Dwayne just ran through a lot of this, but after we've kind of created that network containment and we're trying to isolate things, one of the things that you want to do is disable any compromised accounts to make sure that the accounts that the attacker is leveraging aren't usable anymore. But understand that usually they've compromised your whole domain. So by now they've probably exported your whole SAM, your whole domain database, and they've already forced decrypted passwords, etc. So usually they have everything. So it makes the assumption that everyone is compromised. So change all your passwords. But that changing all the passwords has to happen at a specific point. Once you already are in command of containment and the threat actor is not actively sitting in your environment. The reason is they can, if they're in there still, they can just change the password again. Like they can, it doesn't necessarily kick them out. And they're using that Kerberos ticket, which is a part of the Windows operating system, the Windows domain structure. So they're using your server against you basically until you flush that ticket out of the system. So making sure you do that twice after changing all the passwords. Make sure that you're using different passwords for every a site NAD. And every website, every different domain you have should be differently credentialed. I know a lot of people just want to reuse everything, and you want to, okay, you have an internal domain, an external domain, a production domain, you want to just use the same password everywhere. Try not to, because if that's compromised, you don't want them to have the key to the castle. And then part of eradication that we do also is deploying MFA. And this may not seem like eradication to you, but if you don't have MFA and we roll out MFA after an attack, suddenly the attacker can't get back in. So we're using these tools. There's, if they're using, your VPN or your RDS or something like that to get into your network, if they have their own backend, remote shell, other things like that installed, that's something that Dwayne's team is going to help us eliminate. They'll identify these and we'll nuke them together to really get those out of your system.
Yep.
And so identifying those back end, remote access tools is part of that eradication.
Yeah. I was going to say that I was actually just reading articles on passwords. Like, they're, the bad guys are getting pretty good at it. Like a password like summer 2023 with a $ for the S and an O for, the letter O for the 0. That does not do anything. That is very easy to script and crack in a matter of minutes as an FYI, right? That said, it is not uncommon nowadays. The password is kind of somewhat irrelevant. We've seen lots of scenarios where they have what they call a pass the hash technique. They don't need the password, right? All that, there's behind the scenes, there's and they just sort of pass that through. But if you have good EDR type tools, good firewall, and good policies and all that kind of jazz, then most of that stuff, not always, most of that stuff will stop you, right? You'll hear the term, people say the term defense in depth, right? Give them as many tripping hazards as possible, and hopefully they just move on to the next guy. Yeah, but and while MFA is super important, we've seen many cases and stuff where they've gotten around that. A lot of times just from like MFA exhaustion, that is a real thing. Not all MFA scenarios are the same, so yeah, pick the best one and educate your users, just around the importance and paying attention. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox here now. Sorry.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Yeah, MFA is not all created equal, and it's there are a lot of different technologies out there, and sometimes those easy MFA solutions where it just kind of sends your phone a notification, you just say yes or no. People will accidentally say yes, or they get annoyed and they think, okay, my computer must be doing something that's prompting me all the time. Let me just say yes, and you're letting a threat actor in. It's the easiest bypass right now for MFA.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. Okay, and this is still in eradication. It's really putting in firewall rules to block that threat. Blocking an IP address is important initially, but they can change where they're coming from. So really identifying those command and control servers, those servers that the threat actor is using, blocking those. Again, it's defense in depth. You're putting a lot of things in place to stop this attack. Deploy geo blocking. Turning off RDP access. If you have open RDP to the world right now, please start checking your network, because I'm sure there's 25 different threat actors living in your servers right now. And use a next-gen firewall that can actually detect these things. I say throw non-next-gen firewalls in the dumpster. That's because older firewalls, even ones that we sold up until just a couple of years ago, your Cisco ASA, et cetera, great firewalls, but they actually do nothing for identifying a threat that's coming in. So a next-gen firewall can actually identify the behavior on the network of a threat and then block it real time and actually save you some of this pain. Deploy an EDR. We use this in the eradication phase because if there's malware or tools that the threat actor is using, EDR may recognize it and clean it up and help. And we also use it to help isolate machines. So, if there's a machine that's a threat and it has EDR on it, we can just say isolate the host and it won't be able to talk to anybody else. And, we can use that in a network that isn't really set up right for containment. We can use EDR to kind of create a containment in that method. And key here also is patching vulnerabilities, because that's really where this happened. Once the forensic investigation is completed and you realize that, hey, this happened because these exploits, SMB1 was still enabled on my network. These things were still enabled, and this is really why this happened. Go through and patch this, harden these things.
Yep. Yeah, and I mentioned it again, open vulnerability. Microsoft patch. It's been, they're pretty good about putting them out there, but if it's taking you 6 months to stay on top of your patching, well, you're going to open yourself up, right? The remote access, often from a third-party IT or application support guy, because you got a custom, CRM platform that Bob's computers fix it. Like those are, and then the phishing. Like if you can sort of nip those 3 in the bud, you're going to be better than 90% of the other companies, I would say.
Yep. All right, let's zoom through recovery here. I know we're just about at time here, so let me just run through what recovery is. So we're rebuilding, restoring, or decrypting your boxes. If you have backups that are viable, we're restoring. If you paid the ransom, we're decrypting. But if nothing else, we're rebuilding from scratch and getting your network up and running, getting you so you can do business again. So that's our chief goal with recovery, is getting you so your business operational. And that's really what Airiam focuses on here is that part of this. All the phases up to now, we're working along with forensics and helping them get what they need, helping them create containment and eradication. But recovery is really kind of where we are rebuilding you and getting you back up and running. And we try to do this in parallel. So it's like, while forensics is identifying what's happening, we're creating a containment network and starting to rebuild AD and stuff like that. So we're working hard to get you back up and running. And then any accounts that were disabled is kind of working through those and saying, oh, well, was this a service account that's actually needed for some key application? Do I need to mitigate this account? Do I need to create a new account for these people, et cetera? And so it's getting those services and those users back up and running that had been compromised. And I always lean against just reactivating a account that had been compromised. I'm always about creating a new account for that user, transferring everything over and nuking their old account. All right, next slide, lessons learned. Okay, so after an incident, if you're not using it to improve, you've wasted the whole incident. Yes, it was expensive and painful and you were down and everyone was just at their wit's end and you're having a panic attack and everything else. But the real opportunity here is, regardless of what your role, whether you're a security admin, an IT admin, whether you're an executive, the middle manager, whether it's your company and you're the founder, is to use it to improve your response. So look at where you failed last time. Look at not only how it got in and what the controls failures were and everything, but what can we do to get back up and running better next time? Like, understand attacks will happen. You will get hacked again. But what can we do to make sure that we can identify, respond, and get back up on our feet as fast as possible? And, so you have some decisions to make. Are you going to bring in, Eviden to help, structure your incident response plan and help you practice? Are you going to bring in a company like Airiam to help patch your machines? Do we put in some technology for password rotations like laps and things like that for local admins? And is there something we can do to give you more resilience? And we specialize in that with AirGapped to improve your backups so that you actually have a way to restore next time.
Yeah, I said one thing to quickly add there to it. In these scenarios, time is the enemy, right? Mm-hmm. Potentially your logs, like from a forensic evidence perspective, maybe you only hold the logs, for 5-10 days or something on the firewall, right? So, and it'll overwrite. So you lose, forensic evidence perspective. You also may be under the gun from a timing perspective to make a notification of the breach itself, right? So just sitting on your hands and twiddling your thumbs and thinking about it for too long, don't do that. Like, time is the enemy. You need to kind of get moving if you find out you've been breached.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so here's a checklist, and we're going to send a copy of this to everybody. But everything that we ran through here, and this is really kind of as a business owner or a manager in a business, what you need to start thinking about as far as during an incident, and hopefully you can kind of build these into your actual incident response plan. All right, next slide. Now, final note. I mean, we mentioned cyber insurance. These days, like, you need it. MFA, it should be a requirement for everything that you have, especially email, VPN, and cloud applications. Anything that's internet reachable should have MFA, and also administrative access to your machines should be MFA protected as well. Good cloud backup solutions and a good EDR solution, and we say a managed detection and response solution. So actually an EDR with someone watching it. Having a good EDR is almost pointless if there's nobody acting as a SOC to look at that and manage that for you. Next slide. Go ahead, Wayne.
Always going to drive that. Like I say, we've seen lots good tools, really good tools that threw an alert at 2 o'clock in the morning that no one paid attention to, and you still got hit, right?
Yep.
Yep. That happens all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, where logs, if you look in the EDR, the attack's been happening for a while, but it just wasn't enough to bother anybody. So we have a question here in the chat in the Q&A that says asking about the presentation. Yes, we will send this via email. And any other questions?
No, sorry.
All right.
Sometimes I get a little chatty there. All right, I apologize.
Oh, no worries. No worries. It's hard to actually get content in here in time.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. I've been toying with just running like an IR workshop for companies.
Right.
You know, where I'm spending a day with organizations and that are interested in it and working through an incident response plan and things like that. So we have some more webinars coming up. One of them is rebuilding after an attack, and that's going to be with Mox5, who's one of our recovery partners, and preparing for future attacks with ThreatLocker. And ThreatLocker is an amazing tool to actually kind of stop executables from running. Just great security control software there. If you are interested in any kind of services from Airiam or Eviden, here is our contact information. And whether it's breach response or improvements or discussing a plan or your next steps, we can help. If you need a pen test run or want any kind of security configuration testing done, you can reach out to us and we can work with you on that as well. Airiam is not a pen test company, but we do have autonomous testing tools for pen testing, but we also have great partners, and I'm sure Eviden does as well for actual pen testing. So if you want hand on keyboard, someone actually trying to hack your network to test your incident response plan, that's kind of, we can set up a kind of a purple team situation like that.
Yeah.
All right. Any final words, Dwayne?
No, I guess it's, try to stress people to be vigilant and aware. Something doesn't smell right. Good chance it's not right. And I get it. All this stuff, it costs money, right? And it's not cheap to do things right. But at the same time, I get it. Companies don't have, a blank check to throw to their cybersecurity posture. So, you may need to, each company, different bang for where it's the best bang for the buck. That's a different conversation for each company. But I think both of our organizations can help people with those conversations if need be. But
yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate the chat though.
All right. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Enjoy your day, people.